Well, hello again. I'm Maurice Barratt, and I've got another study in the Parables series. If you're watching on YouTube or Vimeo or anywhere else around the world, welcome. It's a great privilege to be able to teach the unsearchable riches of God. I'm on to the fourth book. This is the cover. I'm writing it. It's not published yet. It'll be published this month. Those are the first books, Parables of the Kingdom. That's based on Matthew 13, the 7 parables, well, there's 8 actually. Mysteries of the Kingdom, that's the second book. And then Obtaining the Kingdom. How do we obtain the kingdom? Who reigns with Christ? Do all Christians reign with Christ? Is it just the bride? So that's interesting. And now I'm looking at the millennial kingdom. Parables and hard sayings about the kingdom. So it's a sort of progressional. I'm carrying on from the last study. We're looking at Luke 17. I'm just going to, it won't be on the PowerPoints. I'm just going to read, because this is in answer to a question that the Pharisees asked Jesus. They must have been asking him, when will the kingdom come? When will the kingdom come? And it's like Jesus didn't want to tell them, because the Pharisees were hypocrites. Why should he tell them? And verse 20 says, and when he was demanded of the Pharisees, come on, Jesus, if you're the Messiah, when you're going to bring the kingdom? Obviously, they were thinking about the physical kingdom, get rid of the Roman Empire and restore the kingdom to Israel. And he will do that on his second coming. When the kingdom of God would come. And he answered them and said, the kingdom of God doesn't come with observation. So that rules out the church, because we can see that, buildings and people. Neither say lo here or lo there. For behold, the kingdom of God is within you. So in this present dispensation, we don't have a physical kingdom. Israel were a physical kingdom. And if you were good and righteous, you had physical blessings. But now we're in a spiritual kingdom. There's no physical kingdom. The church isn't a kingdom. That's Catholic theology. Christendom, the kingdom of Christ, that was what Europe was called before Charlemagne changed it to Europa, after the Greek fable. And he said to his disciples, the days will come when you'll desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you shall not see it. And they shall say to you, see here, see there. Go not after them and don't follow them. And this is the last study. If you've not seen it, I suggest you look at the last study. For as the lightning that shineth out of one part of heaven shineth unto the other part of heaven, so shall also the Son of Man be in his day. I would argue that the day is 1,000 years. The day of the Lord isn't the day he comes. I believe that's, Peter gives us the key, and I've explained it in the study. Peter's talking about the last days. And he says, but 1,000 years is like a day to God and a day to 1,000 years. It's a key, because God made the earth in 6 days, rested on the 7th. So it's a key that God will rule for 6,000 years on this earth, then hand the kingdom to Christ for 1,000 years, because God will be on his sabbatical. There'll be no God in the millennium. Jesus will be God. His name shall be called Emmanuel, the mighty God. Jesus is the only God there, because God's taken his sabbatical. That's why a few chapters of Genesis is the whole plan of God from beginning to end. It's unbelievable how the Bible is how men could think that men wrote it. I've no idea. When you study it and you see that everything's prophetic, every miracle is a prophecy. Everything Jesus said is all prophecy, because it's an eternal word. It's living. No prophecy has ever been fulfilled in entirety, because it lasts till heaven and earth pass. The word will stand. It keeps getting fulfilled in a different form and in more detail. And I'm getting carried away, but that's all in last studies. But now we're coming to this study, and it talks about the days of Noah and the days of Lot. That's why I've called it. And it's not a parable, but I think it's a hard saying, because what are the days of Noah and the days of Lot? I want to look at it. Well, in the days of Lot, and Noah, we'll read it in a minute, they were carrying on with the normal lifestyle. There was no warning of impending doom until they were taken away in judgment. I explained last study that when it said they were taken away, those that were taken away were drowned, weren't they? Till the flood came and took them all away. So the taking away is for judgment. So when people use it, two in a bed, and that's in the context, there'll be two in a bed. One shall be taken and the other left. The one that's taken is judged. That's not the secret rapture. They use that for the secret rapture. But in the context, it clearly tells you that no, the flood took them all away. That the ones who remained were saved. The ones who were taken away were drowned. So when he says there's two in the bed, one shall be taken and one left. The one left is the one who's redeemed, and the one taken. Read it. It's not ambiguous if you read the context. That's the last study. So, what was normal lifestyle to them in Noah's day and Sodom and Gomorrah? It was normal to them, but it was an abomination to God. We need to look at that. So let's read the scriptures that we're looking at. So he's carrying on. So shall the Son of Man be in his day, but first he must suffer. So he said, I'm coming, this is what will happen when I come, but first I've got to die. He's talking about his second coming. The day of the Lord is his second coming, not his first. But he says, first I've got to suffer many things and be rejected of this generation. They didn't know what he was on about. Even after he rose from the dead, they said, will you at this time restore the kingdom? They were still earthly minded, thinking the kingdom was physical. But Jesus says, I've come to bring a kingdom that's not physical. When he restores the kingdom, it'll be physical again. And so he says, as it was in the days of Noah, so this is his second coming, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because he says, I'll come when it's like the days of Noah and the days of Lot. And it's amazing, 27, they did eat and they drank, they married wives and they were given in marriage. What's wrong with that? That's not sinful. They were wicked. The thoughts of the heart were only evil continually in Noah's day. It was wicked. The violence covered the earth. Why didn't he say that? They were violent. They were immoral. But he says they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. That's normal life, isn't it? So there's a clue there. Until the day Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. They were living normal lives till the flood came. This is what it'll be like, and I think these are the days. Likewise also, so he's giving another illustration, as it was in the days of Lot. They ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they building. That's normal lifestyle. But we get the word sodomy from Sodom and Gomorrah. So why didn't Jesus talk about the debauchery and the sexual immorality and the sin? He never mentioned sin. He said they just lived normal lives. They planted, they built, they sowed, they reaped, they married, they gave in marriage. But the same day Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone. The same day. So this is sudden, isn't it? This is not talking about the rapture. This is talking about judgment. Suddenly, as soon as they went out of Lot, the same day it rained fire and brimstone and destroyed them all. Thus even shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. He's not going to come secretly. He said he'll come in the clouds and every eye will see him. Everyone on the planet will see him. It'll be an alien invasion. That's why all the occult films are showing alien invasions. He's going to come with the armies in heaven and all the world will get all the nuclear weapons out to try and stop him because it'll be an alien invasion. It's the world's biggest military coup. Jesus is going to take over this planet by force. He's not going to come and say, peace, man. He's not gentle Jesus. He came as the lamb and was slain. He's coming as a roaring lion to take vengeance. People have no fear of God. He's come to see vengeance and destroy Israel's enemies and reign in peace for 1,000 years. Well, we need to go to Genesis, don't we, to see what it was like in the days of Noah. So that's Genesis 6. I'm not going to read it all. But that's what it will be like. But, before the flood, there was 1600 years roughly before the flood. So there were civilizations. I personally believe the pyramids were pre-flood. They're finding pyramids all over the world in Central America. They're finding great big monolithic stones and statues, and they don't know how men could have done it. How could they take those hundreds of tons of stone? They still don't know how to build the pyramids. You can't get a piece of toilet paper in between the stones. And they were dragged hundreds of miles and they weigh hundreds of tons. I think probably the giants built it before the flood. But I don't know. But they're finding remains of giants all over the world. The Smithsonian Institute in America, they've got loads and loads of 15-foot giants, but it's hidden from the public. They're in secret galleries. You can't have access to them. They're finding remains all over the world in America and islands of the seas. There certainly were giants on the earth, but the Bible tells you. Did you know that all the 7 nations, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Fleabites, or whatever bites that you want, they were all had giants. I've studied it, and every one, the Amalekites, there were giants. Even giants before they went in. Og, king of Bashan, he was a giant. Remnant of the giants, he tells you the size of his bed. So we know that the angels mated with the daughters of men, and there were giants in those days. So that's serious, isn't it? And men began to multiply on the face of the earth. It's an interesting thing. You know, when things get too big, I don't think God's pleased. God delights in small things, doesn't he? He chooses the weak things to confound the mighty, and the things that are not to bring about the things that are. You know, when things get big, it's mammon, isn't it? It's wealth, it's power, God likes the little things. He called one man, Abram, to make a people out of him. He doesn't call committees. He doesn't even call a committee of 12 people. He calls people. It's interesting, isn't it? But we want to grow it. God calls a man and he gives him a ministry and people gather around him. And now he wants to build a church. My ambition is to build the biggest church in Manchester. That's anti-Jesus. He said, I'll build my church. If you're trying to build a church, you're fighting Jesus. But it's amazing how our theology and our traditions of the elders, we think we've got to build a church. God delights in, one man proves God. One man changed from darkness into light vindicates God. You don't need 1 million people. One man, Moses, saved a whole nation. You didn't get 10,000 intercessors all on the faces, smashing the devil and pleading with God. One man who knew God, the meekest man on earth, he went up the mountain and he saved 2.5 million people. You see, God calls men. We think mass is beautiful. Big is not beautiful to God. Small is beautiful. Little is beautiful. Ugly is beautiful to God because he can make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. He delights in that. So he looks for oddbods and misfits and drug addicts and prostitutes and respectable people who count their education and the good looks and the status as dung. Like Paul. He said, I count it all dung. He said, I'm educated, I'm a Pharisee of the Pharisees, but it wants flushing down the loo. It's dung compared with Christ. He didn't become stupid, he didn't become a fool, he was still educated, wasn't he? It's your perception, you see. Are you proud of your achievements? Are you proud of your status? Are you proud of your whatever? It's pride that's the killer. God's not against education, is he, or anything else, or status. God calls people who are wealthy, if they'll live a humble life. So, creation to the flood, about 600 years. So I've computed, with my little brain, that maybe there could be 7 billion people on the planet. Because God called one man, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob had 12 sons, and in a few years there were 7 to the extended family. They went down to Egypt and became 2.5 to 4 million, depending how you compute it. Let's put it in the middle, 3 million from just these 12 sons. So in 1600 years, no contraception in those days. They lived to be 1,000 years old for a good while before the flood, didn't they? It was only after the flood that he said, now you'll be 120. So they had more than one wife, didn't they? What was his name? Bill Hare and was it Enoch? One of them who said, if Cain's avenged 7 times, I'd avenge 70 times. And he had 2 wives. So Lamech, yeah. So people had more than one wife. So I've worked it out. You work it out. It's grains of rice on a chessboard, isn't it? They say if you put 1 grain of rice on the first square and go across diagonal, 2 on that, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 500, and you go up. By the time you get to the end, you'll feed the whole world. That's exponential curve, multiplication, when men began to multiply. So I think they spread over the whole earth. And I think there could have been 7 billion people like there are now. That's just I can't prove it. I'm just getting you to think how many people were there. Men began to multiply. Why does it say that? And the thoughts were only evil continually. Well, it's the same today. Men have multiplied. There's more people born this century than were born from Adam up to this century. I think that's right, isn't it? Or maybe 1800s. But there's more people born this century, because 7 million people, if they double, 7 billion, it's 14 billion. If you've only got 10,000, it's only 20,000. If you've got 1 million and it doubles over 10 years, it's only 2 billion. But when you get 7 billion and it doubles, that's 14 billion. 28, 40, and you're getting trillions. So it's the same today. Every imagination of the thoughts were only evil continually. Well, it's the same now. People are obsessed with self, the selfies. It's unbelievable. People taking photographs of themselves all day long, looking in the mirror and taking... We're obsessed with self. We're obsessed with sex. It's hard being a man. You can't go anywhere without... They use sex to sell baked beans, don't they? You go to the motor show and there's a girl there with long legs and scantily dressed sat on the bonnet of a car. I don't go to a motor show to buy a woman. I go to buy a car. But they use it because they know men are attracted to women. So we're in a sex-mad world and everyone's, besotted with it. Pornography's rife. I think 85% of hits on Google are pornography. That's amazing. And it's a massive epidemic. Christians are hooked on pornography. It's amazing. Pastors have done surveys and pastors have problems with it. And I can understand because it's pushed. If you watch the media, it can make you sex mad, can't it? And drugs to deceive the nations. By your sorceries, the whole world's deceived. Sorcery is enchantment with drugs or bewitched with drugs. Do you know anyone who's not on medication? Because illegal drugs or medicinal drugs, prescription drugs, there's still drugs. There's no difference in them, is there? One legal and one are not. And I understand. But they're not medicines. They're drugs, they're chemicals, aren't they? We used to have medicine from what God put in the earth. That's medicine. But drugs are not medicine. They're chemicals to give us an altered state of consciousness so we don't feel the pain. But what's causing the pain is still there. It doesn't deal with it. Drugs cannot deal with the root of the problem. And it's hard to find somebody who's not on medication for some complaint or to sleep or whatever. And I'm not criticising anyone. It's the mad world we live in. It's rife. But this is Babylon. The whole world's been deceived by drugs because every drug has a side effect. It gives you an altered state of consciousness. And it's sad when I go to Africa and Asia, they're discarding all the natural medicines. When they got malaria, they used to get this herb, and they said it oh, it kills you to take it. It's so pungent, so horrible. They get this leaf and they do it, and it gets rid of malaria. But it's horrible to take. Well, medicine is, but we don't want it. We want everything sugared now, don't we? So they take in our cheap drugs that we don't want. We send them to Africa, and they have those, and it doesn't really cure malaria. But they're abandoning them in these poor countries and taking drugs because they think they follow in the West. It's sad. Well, let me read something from Genesis 6, verse 11. The whole earth was filled with violence. Oh, sorry, Revelation 18. Let me read that first. This is Babylon, the system we're in. The whole world is besotted in the system of Babylon. Politics is part of Babylon. All religions are part of Babylon. It's not the Catholic Church, the Buddhists, the Hindus, Christianity. It's all part of the system of Babylon. And Babylon the religious can't exist without the political. I suppose you know that, don't you? Politics needs religion and religion needs politics. That's why Napoleon made a concordat with Pope Pius. And Hitler made a concordat with the Pope because they need it. And Bush and Clinton and Trump, they all went to Jesuit colleges. You can't separate religion from politics. Religion's only another form of politics, a way of controlling people. So let me read from Revelation 18:23. The light of a candle shall shine no more. This is the fall of Babylon, the Babylon we're in now at the end of the world. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Not some, all nations, the whole world has been deceived by sorceries. That's enchantment with drugs. That's amazing, isn't it? So we're in the last days, surely. Genesis 6, verse 11 to 13. This is the days of before the flood. And the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. The earth is always God's creation. The world in the Bible is cosmos. It means the order, the politics, the mindset, the fashion, the culture. But the earth is God's. It's creation. So creation was corrupt before God, and the earth filled with violence. Why was the earth corrupt? And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. The earth, creation was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Do you know what I think corrupts the earth? I think it's innocent blood. Because it said the earth was filled with violence. Verse 13, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence, shedding innocent blood through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. God destroyed the earth. He didn't only destroy them. People don't realise the face of the earth changed after the flood. I believe there was only one landmass before the flood. And it changed it all. That's why you've got fish in fossils up mountains, and you know, it's all messed about. So carbon dating's a waste of time, because the pressure of God destroying the earth and moving it, and the fountains of the deep being broken up, would disfigure the earth. He destroyed his own creation, not just people, his whole creation. God defaced it and destroyed it, started again. And it's different now. And he was preparing for Babylon. He knew it would rise again. So that's why nations are separated by seas. If there was one landmass, it's easy to get one nation, one language, Babylon. So he prepared. So when he scattered them, it took 1,000 years for them to communicate, because they were separated by 1,000 miles of sea. So can you see God's planning? He's already knowing that Babylon will rise again. And I believe it's innocent blood that corrupts the earth. Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. That's what he said to Abel. He said, where's Abel? He said, oh, well, I'm my brother's keeper. He said, well, I can hear your brother's blood crying out from the ground. When you shed innocent blood, not blood of an animal, because you can eat an animal, you can kill an animal for clothes, that's all right. But when you kill innocent blood, and most wars are about killing innocent blood. The politicians are saved. It's the masses that get killed. The soldiers that get killed, the cannon fodder. The people at the top, they don't go to war. They just plan it and earn billions out of the arms sales, don't they? It's a great money-making machine, war. When you think of blow a plane out of the sky and it's a £10 million to replace it, and there's thousands of planes getting destroyed, it's a massive money-making thing. Enough to make people cause wars to make money, because at the top they're corrupt. So, never in world history has so much blood been shed, because there's more people. It's about the scales. I'll show you in a minute. The number of aborted babies, that's innocent blood, isn't it? The number of babies alone is 1.5 billion. Not million, billion in the last 50 years since it was legalised. In the USA, it's more than 2,362 abortions daily. That's 98 per hour. In the UK, there's been over 9.5 million aborted babies every 3 minutes. When you had 2 world wars, millions were killed, and all the smaller ones currently raging. Add to that the ethnic cleansing programs, Rwanda and Russia, China. Mao Zedong, he killed millions, didn't he? Marx killed millions in Russia. And Africa, there's millions been killed. Innocent blood. So, Stalin, sorry. Yes, Stalin, thank you. Yes, Stalin. Purges, kill millions. Well, not counting the murders, 400,000 every year murders, innocent blood. So surely it couldn't have been worse in Noah's day. I'm saying it's parallel. I know there's always been abortion, there's always been murder, there's always been rape, there's always been homosexuality, there's always been bestiality, perversions. We know that. But now it's become normal, like Noah's day. Well, the wickedness in Noah's day filled up the cup of God's wrath. You know, there's a cup. When God says the cup of wrath, it's got to be filled up. It's not an empty cup. And when innocent blood is spilt, it fills up the cup. It's on the scales. And until the scales get to a certain time, God's wrath doesn't come into play. God's patient, long-suffering, but it adds and adds and adds more blood, more blood, more blood. And in the end, as the scale goes up, God's wrath's getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And he said it's enough. And I believe we're near tipping the scales now for God to... Unbelievable judgment on the earth. Christians have no idea. When God gets angry, it's scary. He said to Moses, stand back, I'll destroy 2.5 million people. I chose them. I love them. And yet they've got me so angry, I'm going to destroy them. Imagine a God like that. Stand back and I'll destroy them. Only Moses' intercession stopped God. But when God read Revelation, the wrath and anger of God. There's no fear of God in the church today. It's happy clappy, isn't it? And we're all dance our way to glory. The judgment's coming. And it begins at the house of God. Judgment God can't judge the world till he's judged his own. I can't smack the child next door. The man will say, sort your own kids out, they've just smashed my windows. You sort your own out first, and then you can say, look, I've disciplined my son, you need to discipline yours. Israel, just a parallel, Israel going into Canaan. They were going to take it by violence, weren't they? They weren't going in to say, please give us the land. It's a shadow of Jesus. Canaan, going over into Canaan, crossing the Jordan into Canaan, it's an ego spiritual. That's not when you die. It's a prophecy of Jesus going to take the land. Joshua is Jesus. It's the same word. Jesus is our Joshua. Moses was the intercessor. Joshua was the fighter. He led the armies, didn't he? Moses was up the hill interceding and Joshua was fighting on the ground. He's the army. He's a type of Jesus. Going to take the world. Smiting the nations with a rod of iron and ruling for 1,000 years. Well, you know, Israel couldn't take the land until the cup of wrath was full up. God said to Abram, I'm going to send you to a land, but you've got to wait. Let's read it, Genesis 15. I just want you to know that the scales, that God's a judge, and it's the scales. That's why for judgment we have the scales, don't we? The punishment must fit the crime. It doesn't in today's world, but the punishment should fit the crime. And so God allows a lot of crime, a lot of blood, a lot of violence, a lot of sexual perversion, because he wants to pour out his wrath. So the punishment will fit the crime with God. And he said to Abram, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that's not theirs. Well, we know it's Canaan. He didn't know. He didn't know where it was. And shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Oh, that's going to Egypt, sorry. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. And after they'll come out with great substance. They came out of Egypt with great substance. After 400 years. So God promised Abram, but it was 400 years later. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. You lived to be 185, was it? But in the fourth generation, can you see how specific this prophecy is? 400 years you're going to have to serve. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. I can't do it until the Amorites, and the Amorites were giants. So they'd mated with angels, the Amorites and the Hittites and the Hivites. They'd mated with angels. So he said, it's not full yet. The cup's not ready to destroy them. God is just. He won't destroy people if they don't deserve it. He didn't just say, oh, go and take the land. It's yours. And they didn't kill innocent people. They had to deserve the judgment of God. The Canaanites weren't Israel's enemies. They were God's enemies. They not Israel's. What had they done to Israel? They were taking their land. They were executing God's justice because the cup was full. So I think why I'm saying this, as in the days of Noah, as in the days of Lot. So surely the cup's getting filled up with all the violence, all the perversion, all the drugs that's about. Surely it's going to be poured on the nations. Babylon's got to fall before Jesus comes. Read Revelation 17 and 18, and Babylon falls, and then Jesus comes. So I think we're near the time. Well, the ark was finished. Noah and his family entered it. And the flood didn't come for 7 days. That's interesting, isn't it? What do you make of that? God said to Noah, come into the ark. And he went in the ark, and God shut the door, so he couldn't go out. It was fixed. But the rain didn't come for 7 days. That lets me think there's a period when the bride will be sealed. There'll be no more salvation. There's no time to repent. It's fixed. The time come when God says, that's it now. It's time to get out of Babylon before I judge you. If you don't, it's too late. If the church don't get out of Babylon, she'll be judged with Babylon. It's too late. When the judgments come, they can't say, oh, well, we'll get out of Babylon, we'll get out of the system. It's too late. The door's shut. And God shut the door. So I believe there'll be a period, but you can interpret that how you want. I'm just saying my revelation, it seems to fit, because there was a time when the bride was shut in, Noah was shut in the ark, but it didn't rain for 7 days to take them away. Revelation 18:4. When the judgment comes, it'll be too late, because it'll be sudden. They didn't expect the flood. Took them all away. They didn't expect fire and brimstone in Sodom and Gomorrah. It caught them out. Revelation 18 verse 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. That's amazing. So God expects his people to be in Babylon in the last days. Can I say that again? He says, come out of her, my people. So he expects his people to be in Babylon, because God puts us in Babylon for our disobedience. So the church is part of Babylon. Christianity is part of Babylon. But it's saying now get out of religion and into relationship. It's time to come out. That you've been not partake of her sins, and you don't receive her plagues. Because it comes in 1 hour. Thy greatness has come to naught. In 1 hour, Babylon falls. There's no time. You've got to get out now. When the fire comes, you can't run. When the rain started coming, there was nowhere to go. The ark had been shut 7 days. So it'll be fixed. Well, Noah was righteous. It said Noah was a righteous man. But it also says in the verse, but he was perfect in his generation. But it can't mean sinless, because there's nobody sinless except Jesus. So he was a righteous. So by faith, you're right with God, by faith. But it said he was perfect in his generation. Well, if you look at the Hebrew word tamim, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's translated perfect 44 times in the Bible. And it's translated most times as without blemish. It's a physical thing. A lamb had to be brought without blemish. It's the same Hebrew word as used in Noah with perfect. In other words, Noah was a righteous man. He was right with God, but physically, he was perfect without defect. In other words, Noah was the only person, I believe, on the planet that wasn't contaminated with the DNA of the angels and women. It didn't say Noah's sons or his wives were, because the giants were on the other side of the flood. They were in Canaan. So clearly some carried that seed through. But Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generation. He hadn't been contaminated with that DNA, that mix, because mixture is an abomination to God. To mix flesh with strange flesh, for a man to go with an animal, that's an abomination. And for an angel to go with a woman or a man, that's an abomination to God. So Noah wasn't contaminated. That was it. He came through the flood. He started again with one man, Noah, and his wife. But his sons, don't forget, Ham got cursed. Well, his son got cursed, Canaan. But Ham sinned, didn't he, with his father? Just as an aside for us, because I want my teaching to be practical. It's not enough for us to have salvation by faith. I'm righteous before God. I am 100% righteous. I'll be never any more righteous than I am today, and I'll never be any less righteous, because I have 100%. I've got the righteousness of Christ. By faith, it's imputed for me. That doesn't mean I'm holy. That doesn't mean I'm without blemish. Christians are proud, angry, obnoxious, lustful, selfish, gossips, bigoted. They're not perfect, and they think it's enough. Well, I'm saved by faith. I have the righteousness of Christ. Yeah, but you need to be without blemish if you want to go on the other side of the judgment. Ephesians 5, verse 27. We've got to purge the blemishes in the flesh till Christ is formed in us. Ephesians 5 to 20. Husbands, love your wife, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Oh, that's a tall order, isn't it? That he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing water of the word. He wants to cleanse us. Jesus is trying to cleanse us, as I'm supposed to purify my wife, that he may present to himself. When a man treats his wife right, it's selfish. Because I want my wife, I want every other man to be jealous of my wife and think, wow, how did Maurice get a silk purse out of a sow's ear? That's what Jesus wants to do. He picks despicable people and he wants to show off his brand. He's doing it for himself. Because if you don't treat your wife right, you're a stupid, aren't you? Because you're one. If you criticise your wife, you criticise yourself. You're one. God doesn't see you as two. Two become one. That he might present to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle. That's not sins, the spots and the wrinkles. The bits of blemishes, dirt on your garments, aren't they? Or any such thing, but that it should be holy and tamim, without blemish, perfect. It's obviously a Greek word there, I've not looked it up, but it says without blemish, same as a sacrifice. You couldn't bring a sacrifice to God if it had a squint eye, a lame foot. It had to be without blemish. You know, James, I mustn't get onto this, but prayer for the sick. lay hands on the sick and they'll recover. When you go into the world, they don't have to get saved to be healed. You just show God's compassion and heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out devils, whether they accept Christ or not. Show God's compassion. But when you're in the light, when you're a Christian, what do you have to do? It said, confess your faults one to another. Faults aren't sins. A fault is a blemish. I've got this table, but there's a little mark on it. There's a blemish. It's just a little crack in it, or a little blemish, a little smirk. That's what we've got to get rid of. Surely as Christians, we're not getting drunk every night. We're not going to orgies. We're not doing these things that the world do. But what about the little blemishes, the little foxes that spoil the vine? And Noah was a perfect man. He came through the judgment. And if the church wants to come through the judgment, they've got to get their act together and get rid of these blemishes. The church is in a mess. Critical, proud, self-love, self-worth. Self's supposed to die so Christ can live his life in your body. But we lead to our own understanding. Oh, I don't think God would mind this, and I don't think. You're not supposed to think. You're just supposed to be obedient. You're children. Children don't think for themselves. They just do what the parents tell them. But we don't want to be little children. We want to be grown up and think for ourselves. Because when you get 15, you know better than your parents, don't you? When you get to 20, you're amazed how much your parents have learnt over the last 10 years. But when you're young, you obey your parents, then you think you know better than them and you challenge your parents. Christians are humble, and then they start challenging God. I don't think God would do that. God wouldn't tell you that, brother. And we play at God, don't we? Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from another. This is where Abram and Lot separated. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. So he didn't live in Sodom, he pitched his tent towards Sodom. He moved there eventually, obviously. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And we know they did practices, sexual perversion. They wanted to gang rape the angels, didn't they? And maybe they didn't know they were angels, but the angels came as men, and they said, we want to know that they were a gang, they were going to gang rape the angels. Maybe they thought they were men. So we're talking about sexual perversion, aren't we? Like today. It's a rare thing when God comes down to earth. Can you think of instances where God came down to earth? Moses. God says, I've heard the cry of my people, and I have come down. Exodus 3, verse 7 and 8. And the Lord said, I've surely seen the afflictions of my people, which are in Egypt, and I've heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. God had compassion, and I am come down to deliver them. God came down out of heaven. Normally he sent angels. Gabriel, go and smite that nation. Gabriel, do this. Gabriel, go and tell a message to Mary that she's going to have a baby. The Holy Ghost will overshadow. He's got 1 billion angels to do his work for him, hasn't he? To send messages, to execute judgment. But God came down, and I'll free them and take them to a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations. Genesis 18. He came down to see Sodom and Gomorrah. Times of great importance in world history, God comes down to earth. So he came down just before the flood. He was going to destroy the earth. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it. The angels are bringing me messages that Sodom and Gomorrah are evil exceedingly. I'm going to go down and see for myself. That's amazing, isn't it? That upsets our theology that God knows everything. I know, but you work out your own theology. God says, I'll go down and see if the reports I've heard are true, which is coming to me. And if not, I'll know. If God's all-knowing, he already knew. Why would he go down? But you work that out yourself. I've worked it out. So the grievous sins of Sodom, we know it's sexual perversion, wasn't it? And violence. And God always judges a nation. The Greeks and the Romans are examples of that. When they get decadent with sexual perversion and greed, then God judges them. Empires have fallen because of they practice these things. The book of Jude tells us about it, doesn't it? Jude 7 verse 8. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah, so he's alluding to. Jude is a book just before Revelation. It's, the chronology of the Bible, the books are not as they were written. If you study them, they're not in the order they were written, or even historically. But I believe it's divine order, because Jude is judgment on the church, and it's just before the book of Revelation. And he says, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, going after strange flesh. I think that would include sex with angels and demons, going after strange flesh. And set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. What God's saying is, when these things happen, that God's going to judge. So I think we're in the days of Noah, don't you? I think we're in the days of Lot, because these things are happening. Well, I've got my critics. Oh, likewise these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, speak evil of dignities. That's in the church. You powers of heaven, bow down. We've no right to ask demons to bow down and worship Jesus. Every knee will bow one day, but you can't bind a demon. We cast them out, don't we? And they're free to go in somebody else. Speak evil of dignities. Well, the critics would say, well, Maurice, it's historical, it goes in cycles. People were as bad 200 years ago, in John Wesley's day and other days in different cultures, but it's never been universal. It's never been universal. India, if you look at the history of India, there's pictures in the temples of sexual perversion. Cultures have always practiced it, but now it's universal. When I was in Kenya, Obama had just been across, and he told the government, if you don't accept homosexuality and legalise it, we'll stop your aid. I was there when he was doing it. They blackmail countries. The whole world's becoming Sodom and Gomorrah. It's never happened in world history that every nation on the world has been deceived with drugs, has practiced sexual perversion as normal. So I accept that it's been before. But when Jesus mentioned Lot and Noah, he didn't mention the sins. He said they were eating, drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. And I got a revelation when I was studying it. They didn't believe they were worthy of God's judgment, so they didn't expect it. That's why they were caught out, because to them, what they were doing was normal, it wasn't sin. That's a different way of looking at things, isn't it? They didn't think they were moral. If you talk to a young person now and say homosexuality, that's a sin, they'll say, what are you talking about? It's normal. Transgender. I'm a man, but I'm in a woman's body. Or a woman in a man's body. That's normal. Little kids are learning this. It's normal. It's not freaking. They're not perverted. They're normal. They think they're normal. Can you see the difference? When I was a boy, abortion was illegal and immoral. When I was a boy, homosexuality was illegal and immoral. Witchcraft was illegal and immoral. They were always practiced in secret by the minority, but everyone knew that if you practiced those things, you were deserving of national punishment, and Christians knew that you would come under God's judgment. But even a person who was an atheist, they knew that if they committed those things, they deserved judgment. But now it's normal. Witchcraft acceptable. 1952, they repealed the Witchcraft Act. It's legal to be a witch now. You can have a Church of Satan. The Satan's covens in prisons now. Nearly most prisons, they have a Satanist coven. It's legal. It's normal. It's just another religion. You can have a Satanist church. Abortion is normal and legal. Homosexuality is normal and legal. Incest will become normal and legal. Bestiality will become normal and legal. Do you know bestiality is legal? In many countries around the world, Christians don't know that. Including Japan, it's legal. 10 US states, bestiality is legal. It's not illegal. See, can you see how the world's going? Well, I can bring a dozen more examples to show that what we think is normal is an abomination to God. That's what brings the judgment. When the government say it's wrong and will punish you, but when the government say it's right and good and normal, they were eating and drinking, marrying and marrying. They were living normal lives to them. They didn't think they deserved God's judgment. You talk to the young people, they don't think they're under God's judgment. Feel sorry for them. They've been indoctrinated. They're living normal lives. It's normal to them. So understand where they're coming from. Don't be so critical of them. Thank God that He's opened your eyes. So, how does it happen? Well, when you do an immoral act, the first time a man commits adultery, he can't look at his wife. He comes home and he says, hello, love, and he's not looking at her and goes upstairs. I'll get an early night. He doesn't want to face his wife. But you know, when you do it regularly, you come home, how you doing, darling? And you give them a kiss, and that's normal. And make love to them at night because your heart's got hard and you're not guilty anymore. And when you keep sinning, your conscience gets hardened, and to you it's normal. It's all right. God understands. Of course God understands it. It's just that He doesn't like it. I understand. I'm flesh and blood. I know the desires of the flesh can get out of control. And God understands that. But He doesn't like it. These are the spots and blemishes we've got to get rid of. You know, the one world government, we've got the new normal. So now it's normal to live in fear of terrorism. 9/11 brought the fear of terrorism. You can't go through an airport with there's no terrorism, is there? When did somebody last blow up a plane? But you can't get on a plane with after you go through the hands up and they look at your body and check your underwear. And it's unbelievable now, isn't it? But they do. Fear of disease. This pandemic has put people in fear. I still see people walking around with masks on, and it's not legal. There's no need to, and it's unhealthy. You're breathing in your own carbon dioxide if you keep it on for a while. Any nurse will tell you that it won't protect you, a mask. Any nurse will tell, any honest nurse. But they're still wearing them because they're in fear. And people are fearing the next strain. They're fearing the war. That's the war in Ukraine. What if he sends nuclear weapons to England? People are this is the new normal, to live in fear. It's like Russia. Everyone's spying on the neighbour and everyone's living in fear of the government. Can you see what's happening? Surely we're near the end. Well, parallel in the church, I won't go into it and take too long, but we brought entertainment in the church. We brought politics in the church. We brought business practices in the church. We're dancing around the golden calf and don't know it. They said, let's have a feast to the Lord. In the Bible, it's Lord, capitals. So they thought they were worshipping Jehovah. But they were worshipping demons. Dual worship. You worship me with your mouth, but your heart's far from me. They were cutting themselves half naked, dancing around and saying, oh, we worship you, Jehovah. They had a feast to the Lord. But that's the church, they're dancing around the golden calf. They don't even know it. They don't read Exodus and think, oh, I wonder if we could be doing that. They're so blind when they read the scripture, there's no conviction. And it's a nice story. Well, Jesus answers to the Pharisees. He's warning, and there'll be great division and some will be taken away in judgment. I don't need to say much more, except to finish. Disciples asked Jesus, at the end of him saying that, it'd be like Sodom and Gomorrah, like Noah's day. I hope you've learned something. I didn't want to go on too much about Noah and Lot, but this is what Jesus is saying, as in the days of Noah. So surely it's worth discussing it. Surely you can get something out of what I'm saying. If you disagree with everything, it'll trigger something to study for yourself. But when he'd finished and said, I'm going to come on that day, they said, where, Lord? So they're looking for a location. Where, Lord? Luke 17, verse 34. So he's saying, I tell you, in that night there shall be two men in a bed. One shall be taken. That's for the judgment, not the rapture, in the context. And the other shall be left. Two women shall be grinding together. One shall be taken, the other left. This is after Noah, when the flood took them away. So taking away is judgment in the context. You've got to read things in context. Two men shall be in the field. One shall be taken and the other left. So the left ones are the safe ones. And they answered and said, where, Lord? Where? That's a good question, isn't it? That's location, isn't it? Where do you come from? Africa, India, France, Belgium, Germany. Where? And he said, wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. What's all that about? Eagles, it must mean vultures, because eagles don't eat carrion, don't eat meat. They kill to eat, sorry, they don't eat dead flesh. Eagles kill the meat, the hawks, they kill the meat and eat the flesh. Crows, crows eat carrion, don't they? Vultures eat dead flesh. What does it mean? I've studied this for years. Well, I've not studied it, but it's been a problem for years. I got the answer when I was reading through Job. You know, I'll give you a clue. If you have a mystery in the Bible or something you don't understand, don't read commentaries on what other people think. Maybe they're brilliant ideas. Just carry on reading your Bible, because the Bible will answer itself. The answers to every question in the Bible is in the Bible, not in theology, not in Bible college. It's in the Bible. And as you read through the Bible, you'll think, wow, that's the answer. So I'm just reading through my Bible up to Job, and I came across this verse, and I thought, that's my answer. And it says, doth the eagle mount up at thy command? Is meaning vultures, and make her nest on high. She dwelleth and abideth on the rock, upon the crag of the rock and the strong places. From thence she seeketh the prey, and her eyes behold afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there she is. Where the slain. Jesus is coming to the battle of Armageddon. He's coming to defeat the armies that are trying to stop him coming. They're gathered together. All the nations of the world are gathered together, aren't they, around Jerusalem to destroy Jerusalem, Rachel's trouble. And Jesus will come, and there'll be a bloodbath, won't there? The battle of Armageddon in the Vale of Megiddo. So that's interesting, isn't it? Where, Lord? The battle of Armageddon. When he comes, he's going to avenge Israel. I'll leave that with you. So, Lord, please help us. I just pray as we go through these studies, Lord, these difficult sayings, that you'll give me revelation and give people revelation as they're listening to it, Lord. I know your Holy Spirit can speak to them on a subject that I'm not even discussing, Lord. That's how you work. You speak to people individually and personally. And I pray that everyone who's open will get something from this study, Lord. I pray that they'll have eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts to perceive, not what I'm saying, but what the Holy Ghost is speaking to them. Bless them, Father, in their studies. Amen. God bless you. The next study will be the widow and the judge, and that is a parable. But it's about the kingdom, about the millennial, the widow and the judge. So God bless you. See you for the next study.